Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an mesmerizing. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an mesmerizing. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off.
Every once in a while, I come across someone so humble, so knowledgeable, and so dedicated to the mysteries of their particular region that I wonder how I could become so lucky. Then I realize it isn't about me. Synchronicities bring like minds together in the very same fashion as vortexes across the world are connected. If you put the time in, it's not a matter of if these amazing connections happen, but rather when. Missouri, home of high strangeness. And nobody knows the backwoods and anomalous playgrounds better than our guest and guide to all things Missouri, Mr. Michael Huntington. Whether talking UFOs, lights in the skies, strange orbs, spook lights as they're called, Momo, the Missouri Monster, or urban legends like the Albino Farm, or the infamous Marley Woods. Talking geomancy, ley lines, the 37th parallel, and occult truths of river goddess worship. Mr. Michael Huntington is a seasoned travel writer with articles presented all over the world, all over the web, including strange travels. He's an experienced blogger with works on Vice.com, local news, social media, Motherboard, Somewhere in the Skies outlets, and more. Nobody has the pulse of all things mysterious and Missouri like Mr. Michael Huntington. We are blessed to have this Cape Girardeau resident share his perspectives, theories, and general overall knowledge with us. And I couldn't be happier to introduce the hero of Missouri High Strangeness, Mr. Michael Huntington, to the Hyper Anomalous Esoteric Research Organization podcast. Hi, good evening, Michael. How you doing?
I'm doing good, Ryan. Thanks for having me here. I've been following your work for years, and it's finally good to be able to talk to you.
Man, I'm so excited to talk to you. There's so much that Missouri has to offer, and I know that you're there, pretty much boots on the ground, and not only that, you're somebody that's like absolutely interested and wholeheartedly involved with this. There's castle ruins. It's Kansas City Workhouse, the psychiatric museums, the Devil's Icebox, the Albino Farm, the infamous Marley Woods. I went to the Missouri State Penitentiary in Jefferson City expecting not too much, and I was blown away. And it's absolutely and sincerely one of the neatest treasure troves of mystery in the United States.
Yeah, certainly Missouri, probably more than a lot of states, has more than its fair share of strange happenings. Although I think if you look around, pretty much you can find every state has some sort of something along those lines, some sort of haunted institution or, an urban legend involving, strange people and, secret bases and unusual hotspots. I'm from Missouri. I was born in St. Louis back in the 60s. I'm in my 50s, so I'm a little older than some of the younger folks out there. And I've been into this subject pretty much all of my life, even since I was a little kid, So it's been a lifelong thing. And certainly living in Missouri, we do have our motto is the show me state. So we look at everything with sort of a skeptical eye, but we do luckily have abundance of strange stories, urban legends, unusual phenomena, and locations that are just filled, with a variety of phenomena, such as the Marley Woods, which is often called Missouri's Skinwalker Ranch. So, but there's a lot of places like that in Missouri, and some good research come out of here. And pretty much, I'm a travel writer. It's not my full-time job, but I like to travel around and explore a lot of places and document them. And if you want to talk about Missouri, we can start talking about some stuff.
Yeah, it's being a travel writer. I'm really impressed with. I guess I'll just be honest. I've kind of been following your work as well for quite a while, and I really think that the urban legends and being that you grew up in St. Louis, and are so aware of all this. There's so many urban legends that it's really kind of hard to separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, because it seems like everybody has an opinion, and not many people have ever been to any of the locations, and the ones who have keep it very close to the chest, and it seems like they don't want to share much. And I find that with the Marley Woods, for example, and it's fascinating. What could you tell us about the Marley Woods?
Well, yes, the Marley Woods has sort of been enigmatic for the past 20 years or so, mostly because there's not even such a place as Marley Woods. The Marley Woods. It's a moniker that was devised by Ted Phillips, the famous trace investigator who was Dr. Jalen Hynek's protege, incidentally, a Missouri researcher, very established and very respected. He started doing a study in south central Missouri at a couple of farms. I think in the late 90s is when he started looking into it. But he wanted to do a scientific-based observation project as much as he could. And, the best way to make sure that people aren't interfering with your investigation is to keep the location locked down, because I think he and a lot of researchers are sort of the notion, if you're going to observe phenomena, the best places to do so is to find these anomalous spots where there is recurring phenomena, where there are anomalies that are maybe not predictably observable, but if you put the time in, you'll more than likely come across something. I think the approach that was tried at Skinwalker is the same sort of thing, and that's the big deal with a lot of these phenomena, is trying to lock them down to be able to study them, because they seem to move and they seem to almost have a mind of their own. So it's understandable that you would kind of keep it locked down, and that's what Ted Phillips did. He had a special investigative unit comprised of some Missouri researchers, and they observed for I think around a decade at least, and they caught some interesting anomalous stuff at this location. And it's sort of a semi-secret location. Out of respect for Ted Phillips, it's generally not exploited or promoted, or folks don't go generally into the specific location where he did his investigations, out of respect, because it is their project. And I do think there's going to be some stuff coming out. I think they are finally going to put some of that stuff together and into some movies or whatever. So we can look forward to that. But the Marley Woods is actually not just a series of farms. It's actually an entire area. There's it's sort of a triangular area, which is kind of interesting, but it's all throughout that whole region, and indeed throughout all of southeast Missouri, there have been recurring instances of strange phenomena in a lot of these same locations. Now, certainly some of them are going to be urban legends, but those, urban legends, we can sort of separate the wheat from the chaff. We can sort of identify what is stories that teenagers tell, such as the albino farm, near Springfield, which really hasn't, been documented as being a legitimate thing outside of, teenage lore. But certainly, if there's a long history going back, even to native times in some of these locations of having strange phenomena, then it's something that you can take a look at. And the Marley Woods is very similar in a lot of ways, to the Skinwalker situation. The study was done on a couple of, ranches, although the entire basin there is actually phenomenological. Same thing with the Marley Woods. The whole region down there is phenomenological. And there's a variety of things that have occurred. UFOs have been seen. Lights have been seen, strange orbs. Everybody's familiar with the basketball size amber or white orbs. Spook lights is another term that you could call them. Cattle mutilations, cryptid sightings of creatures, weird time slips and sort of poltergeist-like activity has been alleged by observers, researchers, as well as people in those areas that are willing to come forward. Vortex-like phenomena, strange atmospheric openings, for lack of a better word, where things come in and out seemingly. So it very similar sort of thing. And I think if you look around enough, you'll find a number of places like this where things can be readily experienced, and where science and research should focus its attentions, because that's we can debate whether the Pentagon has all the secrets, but ultimately we still need to focus on the phenomena and try to engage it and try to understand it, where it's at. And I think there's a lot of places out there, Bridgewater Triangle, Yakima lights, Marfa lights. There's spook lights galore. There's haunted places galore. There's places where there's a lot of activity centralized. And the Marley Woods is one such place. I've been through there half a dozen times, just to document and take pictures. And I really haven't had anything overt happen to me there. But of course, I didn't spend long periods of time. But you always get those photo and video anomalies that sort of show up, which is an intriguing thing, not necessarily evidentiary in itself, but I think it's worthy of further study, and I think places like this are worthy of long-term study, and study that we can all be involved in, instead of, say, keeping it secret and proprietary, that's sort of a frustrating thing, because we want to know more, and we want to dig into these places and find out some of the mysteries and try to answer some of these things, which is what we should do. We should definitely try to get out there and visit some of these spots if we can.
That's awesome. And Michael, I hate to pinpoint. I know everybody wants to know where the Marley Woods are, and it's kind of how Skinwalk used to be. That whole shapeshifter corridor area used to be, where everybody wanted to know where it is. Nobody really knew. And then as time developed, certain individuals and people and institutions and such, it eventually made the limelight, let's say, or the attention, it was grabbed. The attention of the people was grabbed in the area. Before then, it was just locals that knew. And I don't want to pinpoint, and because I respect the semi-secret location, would it be wrong to assume that it is somewhere around the Lake of the Ozarks?
It is not near Lake of the Ozarks.
Okay, perfect. That's good, because that... I did write an article recently for the International Paranormal Inquisitor. If people want to kind of check that out, it has a larger map on there of the region, and pretty much in the center of that map is where the Ted Phillips's group did their study. I don't want to,
tell people where the exact study was. Although, like I said, if you do your research, you'll be able to find some places that actually go into detail more. There's a couple of websites out there. The Missouri Investigators Group, which is conducted of Missourians, has some more detailed information if you want to, be in the same spot where, Phillips and his people, did their observations. But, their study pretty much, petered out, a decade or so ago. So, there are other investigators actually conducting some field investigations throughout that area, and it's not just the handful of farms where they were given permission, to camp out. It's actually the entire area in south central Missouri, west of West Plains, east of Alton, all within that corridor, and those ranches and farms and wooded fields. It is pretty anomalous, and so it's I just don't want to step on pedestals because the areas work so much, and but it is important that we do look at these things and do recognize that there are places that are deserving of long-term study. And I try to encourage people to focus on some of these anomalous spots because that's where we can get some data, as opposed to just being reactionary and just taking a report after the fact, but yeah, it's a south central Missouri area. It's southeast of Lake of the Ozarks, a couple hours from there.
Awesome. The reason I asked, and the only reason I asked, is because I remember, and again, this is going off of like memory, which I'm getting up there in years. Chris O'Brien had mentioned on a podcast, I couldn't find it before we recorded this one, but he had mentioned some odd goings on around the Lake of the Ozarks, and that's the only reason I mentioned it. But I think you're right that there's so much going on all over, and I completely understand the secret location and the ability to try to keep those areas somewhat locked down, because, and I recently purchased a property that I totally went around about this the wrong way, and I was like, oh great, I got a spot, and I got a piece of the pie, and oddly enough, it is also triangular in form, as you mentioned. And I noticed that these areas, these urban legend areas that have time slips, mutilations, vortex-like phenomena, it's not only difficult to keep the locations locked down, but you find that from time to time, it's not a matter of like, if you're going to see something, it's a matter of when. And you'd mentioned that with the albino farm near Springfield, do you think that is mostly hype? I mean, there's been really, really bad movies made about it. Some pretty... yeah, is there any legitimacy to that?
Well, there's always some legitimacy to the stories, because ultimately, a lot of this stuff comes down to anecdote, and it does come down to small town, lore and urban legend and rumors. Even if, there's something substantive behind it, they still hold their place within these communities as, influencing the culture and being part of the history, You can't really escape that. I do think there are urban legends that have their basis in truth, and then there are urban legends that have their basis in a pop culture or some sort of circumstance that was just sort of extrapolated and changed over the decades. The albino farm near Springfield, Missouri, I think for the most part it is an urban legend, because people have looked into it. Researchers have tried to nail it down. They've been able to nail down, the specific farm and, the families involved. But there, as to rumors of secret government experiments on albino children and all that, there's really nothing there to substantiate that. It may or may not be the case, but I think largely, at least that urban legend is an urban legend, because there's really nothing else to back up any of the other contentions, other than it was a real place, and maybe at one time there was, an albino or two, a person with the pigment derived, not present in their body, that gives them sort of a white appearance or whatever. Even the term albino, I think it's sort of a, considered a slur. So I do apologize. But, that is what it's called. But I haven't been out there to the specific spot. I know where it's at. If I do make it out to Springfield, I'm sure, if I have time, I'll try to do some documenting, because I'm all about the stories and the lore, and documenting the locations, and then letting them stand where they stand.
Absolutely. It's interesting that these locations, much like the albino farm, that I'm so glad that you said that it is not, because that's always been my stance. So I appreciate that. But getting back to the strange orbs, the spook lights, the UFOs, do you think Missouri has been bypassed because it's just been overlooked? I think it's been overlooked personally.
Well, you can get that interpretation, but I think it's a mistaken interpretation, because Missouri actually has been at the center of ufology for a number of times. It has, on more than one occasion, been the state with the highest reports from time to time. It does have an active MUFON group that constantly is investigating aircraft. I think the hot spot for seeing UFOs is near Whiteman Air Force Base, just outside of Kansas City, where we incidentally have all of our stealth bombers located, and nuclear weapons. And incidentally, it's the home of the 509th bomb group, the guys that supposedly found the saucer at Roswell. Most of our sightings occur around that area, although Missouri has had a history of sightings going back to the modern age of flying saucers. Missouri actually, the flying saucer groups in Missouri actually were from where MUFON sprang. So, MUFON has its grassroots here in Missouri. Ted Phillips is from Missouri, and as I said, he investigated, I think, 3,000 or more, landing cases over the course of his studies. Most of that stuff was done in Missouri. I've retraced and visited dozens and dozens of some of his original cases, just to go there and take pictures, because I think it's, it's needed for the history to document some of this stuff. I think Hynek and Ted Phillips' first case together was at Roaring River, just south of Springfield. So, it has that. And of course, Missouri, aside from its number of sightings, there was an alleged flying saucer crash in 1941 outside of Cape Girardeau, where I'm at. There was a very public flap of encounters that occurred around Piedmont in 1973. Hundreds and hundreds of people, some of them mass encounters of UFOs over months near Piedmont, Missouri, and Brushy Creek area, which is actually just east of the Marley Woods area. That there were so many that Hynek actually came down for a couple days. They actually sent divers into the lake here because people had encountered USOs under the water. And it also instigated at the first university, and I'm not talking Condon. The Condon Committee certainly, was a University of Colorado study instigated by the Air Force, but the first real sort of university department study into UFOs came out of Southeast Missouri State here under Harley Rutledge, Dr. Harley Rutledge, who was the head of astrophysics. He did a study in Piedmont of the lights and wrote, the project was called Project Identification. He wrote a book publishing his findings, and he came to the conclusion that, there was some sort of unknown phenomena that could be, categorized, could be, quantified, it could be observed. He called them protostars, but he did observe a lot of the orb type stuff. And then you have, the Marley Woods in the early 2000s, where Ted Phillips and some Missouri researchers engaged in that study. Missouri also, a couple of the researchers that were involved in Ted Phillips' study, Debbie Ziegelmeyer and her brother Chris Zukowski, their brother and sisters, they actually came up with that, from studying a lot of the cases in Missouri, the theory of the 37th parallel that was written in Ben Mesrick's book, and is now, a TV show, UFO trailer. What's that show called?
Alien Highway, yeah.
The northern part of the Marley Woods actually goes along that parallel, and I think that parallel does extend all the way out to Utah, as they say in that book. So, Missouri has had its fair share in UFOs, definitely, but it's also, got the Missouri Monster, Bigfoot. There's a movie out about it right now that you can check out. And indeed, Missouri has quite a few haunted locations, spook hollows and ghost light roads, and the Joplin lights near Missouri are pretty famous. And there's haunted places like the original Exorcist house, where the real Exorcist story took place. That was in St. Louis, Wet Mansion in St. Louis, and there's haunted cemeteries and haunted houses and haunted prisons and institutions and hospitals all over the state. So Missouri does have an abundance of this sort of strangeness and a long history of trying to relate to it and come up with some answers.
Michael, I think it's so amazing that it really does. And I don't think anyone is really, when I was searching, my very best friend lives in Missouri, and he's a pastor. He's a Baptist pastor, and he's interested in the paranormal, but more from a theology standpoint. And he's interested in this stuff, and it's hard to navigate because in other areas, it's very easy to find the quote-unquote expert in an area. But Missouri, it seems like even finding someone who is involved with or understands the functions of the landscape like you do, it's difficult. And I really just have to tip my hat to you because you're very interested in this. And I'm glad that you mentioned the Bigfoot. Michael, because Momo, how can you have a Missouri conversation? We're going to have you back on the podcast because an hour is not enough for Missouri.
Okay.
But the Momo, the whole Momo thing, Missouri it's just a checkerboard of mysterious events. And what have you heard of the areas and the situations where Momo has been interacted with or seen? I know a lot of people may not know what Momo is, but and I want to get to everything, but there's just not time. There's the Whitman Air Force Base. There's Like,
well, we'll leave that for next time. We should say that MOMO, which stands for Missouri Monster, MOMO, specifically was a certain creature, Bigfoot-like, but also very different than your typical Bigfoot hominid. It was seen around the town of Louisiana, Missouri, which is up in the northeastern part of the state on the Mississippi River, back in the early 70s, 71, 72 primarily. And it became a monster craze. You know, the press from all over the world kind of focused on it. It was the tabloid journalism of the 70s, sensationalism and monsters and weirdness was everywhere. So, but there were legitimately a lot of sightings, okay? There's different theories as to whether or not, it was a hoax, hysteria, something underlying that was legitimate. But Momo is different than other Missouri Bigfoot creatures in that, throughout other parts of the state, Bigfoot generally fits that description, of being 8 foot tall, 300 pounds, 5 digits on the toes or whatever. Momo was a little different, hairier, shaggier, glowing orange eyes, 3 toes, and there was more of a UFO connection to that creature than the other Missouri stuff. But yeah, we can go into detail some other time if you want.
I agree. I think that's a good
Missouri
idea.
Bigfoots. There's certainly plenty to talk about.
There's a whole other podcast there. I'm really glad that you brought up the 37th parallel and Ben Misrick and the UFO phenomenon, because there's a lot there. There's a lot there. Do you think that I know people go a little bit wild with the geomancy a bit, but is there something to that parallel and to the ley lines?
Well, there's sort of a debate right now within ufology, and I think it's or the UFO research community, and I think it's a good debate to have. There's a debate as to whether or not there are even such places as hotspots. Okay, and certainly, if you have a line is just a series of, points on a map. So, you sort of do have to get back to that idea. Are there hotspots? And what are their characteristics? And it could be argued, certainly from a statistical point of view, if you talk to somebody like HEROParanormal, who just does reporting data and, can calculate reports and put them on a map or whatever, it appears that the phenomena is everywhere. And it appears that, maybe it's random or, tied into population. Certainly you have to have a witness to witness something, right? So that's an interesting sort of thing. But I think a lot of the statistical approaches are dismissive of traditional stories tied to locations. Okay, nowhere in those statistics, those UFO statistics, are you going to find Bigfoot accounts, vortexes, cattle mutilations, Bigfoot or whatever, nor are you going to find long traditional stories, lore, even folklore, even religious tales going back to the natives, which also needs to be taken into account. I think if a place is active and has been active for a long period of time, maybe 100 years or whatever, and there are stories, anecdote, and tales that go back, then I think that backs up the notion that some place is a localized, anomalous area. Now, what does that mean? Well, we're sort of getting into the big questions here. With ghosts, Bigfoot, UFOs, haunted places, what makes a place active, right? Why are certain phenomenological anomalous events occurring at specific places tied to geography? Some people have speculated about energy lines, have talked about the the magnetosphere, and there's certain electromagnetic things that allow, who knows, spiritual beings or interdimensional or whatever. There are degrees of sort of a spiritual approach or a scientific approach with this. The ley line stuff generally has been sort of, it does have its magical components. But if we're trying to look at stuff objectively and rationally and scientifically, if someplace does have a demonstration, or it demonstrates that it is phenomenological and it's repeatable and therefore observational, then we get into, what's causing this? What allows for this? What within the geology, the geography, the conditions are allowing these anomalous events. The only place that's really done long-term studies on this is Huntington in Norway. They have had a long-term field study observing this anomalous area since the 80s, and they're still going to this day. And things have been observed, and things have been recorded, and things have been measured with scientific data. And so there's something there. Now what does that mean? Are certain areas creating some sort of natural occurrence that we're not aware of? There are theories as to, maybe certain orbs or Earthlights, some sort of unknown buoyant plasma that has high electromagnetic fields and kind of can influence how we perceive them or whatever. Others have extrapolated the notion that maybe certain areas allow for quantum fluctuations to where realities can be traversed, the interdimensional sort of thing, the interdimensional portal or gateway, or at least a place where it's easier to go through or in and out, or maybe there are just some places geologically natural that allow for a blurring of realities, or at least a influence upon our perceptions. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where we need to go ultimately, is to look at these localized places and do study the geography. I think one thing you do find at a lot of hotspots is springs, mm-hmm. underwater springs. Some sort of flowing water underneath. Would that contribute to some sort of Earthlight phenomena, some sort of buoyant plasma? Maybe, but it also doesn't explain a lot of the more high strangeness stuff. Like physical craft and cattle mutilations, certainly can't be explained by, some sort of atmospheric phenomena, but each case and each place should be looked at on its own merit. Some places I think are more active than others. Some places exhibit certain types of phenomena and others don't. So, we do need to start looking at these. There's a new phrase out there. It's called luminal cartography. And it's pretty much what I do and other people do. We travel around and we try to, first document as many anomalous places as we can, certainly, for heritage, to preserve the folklore, because a lot of these small towns are dying. Mm-hmm. And with them, their stories are dying, so just from a sociological folklore stance, it's good to document some of this stuff. But, I put pins on maps, and I also Google stuff, and you can see patterns. It's amazing. All around the Marley Woods, just north of the Marley Woods is where a UFO contactee named Buck Nelson had flying saucer conventions. He claimed that aliens would come down. He was a classic, 50s era contactee. That's just north of the Marley Woods. Is that a coincidence? I don't know. Mm-hmm. Because we're pretty far out here. We're in rural Missouri. For people to make some of these claims, there's got to be some basis. And then just a few miles to the west of that, near Norwood, there were 30 cattle mutilations, a decade or so ago. So everywhere around, it's there's a lot of different things that sort of make you wonder. It's like, are these connected?
I'm really interested in what you're talking about with this, and I think that you're right. There's something there, and I think the waterways may be a key issue. Hessdalen is at the top of my list of places to visit. I probably won't go there until I go with another local researcher here in Utah, Erica Lukes, because I don't know about the area. But back to the water, it's an area, oftentimes these waterways have been revered as, there's a lot of river worship and goddess worship with like the purification and emancipatory powers that the worshiping the river traditionally involves. And Missouri is a main artery for not only a waterway, but, multiple waterways. And it, whether it's the Missouri, the Mississippi, do you think, and it's this is obviously across the country, you see this also in the shapeshifter corridor where water is very rare. And you see this in the Susquehanna Valley in Pennsylvania. Like, do you think that a water deity, or like in mythology associated with these things, do you think that there is a crossover to some of these anomalous lights, behaviors, and patterns that we see?
Well, I think it's a possibility. Certainly, Missouri does have a lot of, underground streams and aquifers and springs and such. The Ozarks is, it's actually a mountain, system in Missouri, and there's a lot of things going on. I do think in some places, certainly how the geography is arranged, what minerals are in it, and how water is flowing, certainly can has the possibility of creating some sort of natural phenomena that we are unaware of. And we're still discovering stuff. We only discovered high atmospheric sprites, just within the past decade or so, and are getting photos and documenting them, and finding the varieties and whatnot. So there's still a lot to learn as far as geological science and atmospheric science. As to waterways being traditional spots with a magical component to it and a phenomenological component to it, certainly. There are native stories of creatures, along the Mississippi, in the Mississippi, in the ponds and streams around here, that go back, and there's newer stories even, related. There's a town just across the river over here called Grand Tower, and it's called that because there's a rock feature in the middle of the Mississippi, okay, and it's like a rock, and it's called Tower Rock, and that place has the rock itself goes back to Indian lore as being a haunted place, and it's off limits. The conquistadors, when they explored the Mississippi, actually placed a cross at the top of it to denote the expansion of the Spanish conquest. And there's stories that go back to there. And in this little town of Grand Tower, there are haunted houses. The mountain range is called the Devil's Backbone, and all the features seem to be related to the devil. At one time, there were like pirates, like river pirates there that lived in the caves, and strange creatures. The Murfreesboro mud monster was seen there in the 70s, and at the same time as the Piedmont encounter over there, there was 2 instances of UFOs siphoning electricity off of the local power plant that were observed. UFOs were observed siphoning electricity seemingly before they were chased off by jets. But the reason I bring that up is that area right there where Tower Rock is one of the spots on the Mississippi River, and I've talked to riverboat people who have navigated the river, it's one spot where some of their equipment seems to fail. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's sometimes their navigational stuff will fail. Sometimes their communication stuff, equipment will fail. It's sort of a frequent thing, but it's like it's known as just being a place for some reason where you might get your radio cut out of. It's also, there's little whirlpools and stuff there. So that gets to the question of, you have an anomalous spot. You have a place with a history and a plethora of weirdness going on, and then you also have some actual scientific anomalous stuff occurring that seems connected to the river and seems connected to perhaps the geology that makes you wonder, and certainly should be looked at. And all of these things should be taken into consideration. I think all of these variant stories, I think, sort of create a preponderance of evidence, not that's conclusive of anything, but at least demonstrates that there are areas that are phenomenological, and in a lot of cases, they are connected to water.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up Tower Rock, Michael. That's so cool because, it reminds me a lot. It's almost like it doesn't belong there geographically. It's much like Devil's Tower. It's
right.
And, we know Devil's Tower from Close Encounters. And, it's one of those areas that not only before I was married, I used to love riding my Harley there from, the Sturgis and the Black Hills. But these areas, it seems like they're different, and there's something different about them. And when it comes to the waterways, I think, so often in history, we see things like Egypt and the river worship there, with the Nile. And if the United States had a Nile, it would be in Missouri. No question. There's no question about that. And the timeline with the Marley Woods, and I know I'm throwing a lot at you here, but I know we have a little bit of time left. But the timeline with the Marley Woods you mentioned seems eerily familiar with the timeline in the Shapeshifter corridor of Utah there in Shapeshifter territory. And, do you think that there's something about that 37th parallel and the waterways that it may be cyclical, or that this is something that is really, truly a fact of Mother Nature literally exposing herself in a way, or the oddities of our universe?
Yeah, it's. I'll just be honest with you. I don't know. I don't know. If the 37th or the 34th or whatever parallel it is. I don't know if it's a real thing or not. Because I do think that you can, draw lines pretty much anywhere you can find, this sort of stuff going on everywhere. I certainly am more interested in points on the map, than lines, because you can kind of narrow down the stuff a little better, and you can see the locations and you can see their connectivity, I think, a little bit better. I don't know what could be going on. As I said, it might be. In some places, maybe it's geological and natural. I think maybe in some places there is some sort of doorway or opening happening. There may be, in some circumstances, some intelligence at work. Some sort of. Everybody sort of has this idea that, at least in some places and in some cases, that there's an intelligence at work, especially when you get like the poltergeist type activity. Things disappearing, things reappearing, the sort of the time stuff, the mind game sort of things, the synchronicities and all that. And those are prevalent in Skinwalker, and they're also prevalent in Marley Woods and other spots. I've been to Waverly Hills Sanatorium, the haunted place outside of Louisville there, and you get the same sort of stuff in the haunted places as you do that are alleged at places like Skinwalker and Marley Woods. You get the mind games and the voices and the electricity drains and equipment disappearing and then reappearing. You get that same sort of stuff, which gets you to if there is an intelligence, where is it coming from? Is it coming from ourselves somehow? Is it coming from some sort of interdimensional being, or are we talking about, classic spiritual beings? Whatever that means. And I think it might be different in different places. The Skinwalker lore, incidentally, is not just limited to Utah. Missouri has Skinwalkers as well. Because we were along the path of, we had quite a few native tribes in this area, and we were, part of the Trail of Tears that brought the natives to the reservations, and we even have some parks here, Trail of Tears Park here in Cape Girardeau that has quite a few ghost stories, and some of them are Skinwalker related. Some sort of being, some sort of native being, spiritual / human being that can manipulate its appearance and deceive people, and has some sort of nefarious, ominous essence to itself. So like maybe a werewolf, maybe an evil shaman, maybe some sort of devourous creature. Those things happen here in this area too. Missouri has werewolf stories. I investigated one a couple months ago near Seymour that took place 100 years ago, where they actually shot, a giant wolf that looked like a dire wolf from the photograph, and could there be some sort of spiritual being? Could there be some sort of magical thing? That's where you get into speculation, but I will tell you, regardless of how skeptical you are, and I certainly am skeptical on a lot of things, when you're out in these places in the dark and these stories come back into your mind, you sort of dispense with your bravery.
Absolutely, and I'm a sucker for that. I love that, and that. I think that's really interesting that there is so many similarities.
When I published my article in the International Paranormal Inquisitor on the Marley Woods, George Knapp actually, got on to one of the posts online, and he said the same sort of thing that you're saying. And George Knapp would know about Skinwalker Ranch, right? So, he said, he has talked to Ted Phillips, and he sort of agrees with the idea that if there's any other place like Skinwalker, it's there in Missouri, and that there are other places like this, perhaps places that are undiscovered, because the people just don't want to be known for the creepiness, or for weirdness or whatever. I'm certain there are places, and Marley Woods is way out there. It's, people aren't just going to go out there and, you're going to have to drive 4 hours from wherever, to get out there to those rural areas. So you really have to kind of go out of your way. And so I don't think too many people will be venturing out there, even if they're interested researchers.
That's true. That is so true. And I just have to ask, I know we're limited on time, but the 1941, you're right there at the pinpoint, the area, the activity, the UFO. What happened there in where you live? Could you tell us a little bit about Cape Girardeau and how that all went down?
Yeah, I live in Cape Girardeau, which is a small river town on the Mississippi in southeast Missouri. The area that's called the Boot Heel. It's that little notched down there. I'm a little bit north of the Notch area. But Cape Girardeau, along with its other UFO accomplishments, boasts a flying saucer crash that predated, allegedly, the Roswell crash. Cape Girardeau crash took place sometime in April of 1941, allegedly, and the story is, unlike Roswell, we're dealing with second-hand accounts and multi-generational accounts more so than first-hand witnesses. But classic tale, a reverend was asked by the local police chief to come and give rites or some sort of blessings at a supposedly an airplane crash site one night. They get into the car and they head outside of town, and it's in a burning field, and it turns out to be not an airplane. It turns out to be your classic flying saucer crash, a silvery disc cracked open with a couple of dead aliens and one supposedly still alive. You kind of get that same sort of archetype with a lot of these. They look at it, they look inside, they see hieroglyphics, and the creature is a gray-looking type being. And then before you know it, as the firemen and police are putting the stuff out, you get the military that comes up, the Army, and they cordon off the area. They swear everybody to secrecy under penalty of treason or whatever, and they clean everything up and ship it off to the nearest base, and eventually it probably ends up in Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. But this account comes from Charlotte Mann, who was relayed the account, and supposedly had been shown pictures of the alien that was still alive. It comes primarily from her. She spoke at the International UFO Congress, I think, recently. But she's not the only person that has substantiated this story. I've spoken to dozens of people that remember their grandparents telling them about it, and I've even met people that claim to have pieces of the craft hidden away. I've been out to a couple of the alleged crash sites to document them or whatever. It's sort of an ongoing story, although there's not much more to go further with it, because we're dealing with 1941 as opposed to like 1947. So most of the primary people are just dead. But it's possible if we can nail down some of these locations, we can maybe find some debris. That's something that might be doable in the future. There also was a nearby airplane hangar field that was devoted to training pilots. And we're talking 1941, so it's the lead up to the war. There was a pilot training facility right nearby. And there were certainly some crashes of students in that time period. So, are we dealing with a legitimate crash? Urban legend, something misidentified. It's sort of up for grabs with all of this. But people claim flying saucer. People do claim that it was a UFO and it wasn't one of ours. And it's something that Cape Girardeau is just going to have to deal with for the rest of history. Once you get a legend attached to you, it's not going to go away. It's going to stay with you. So it's best to try to explore and learn as much as we can. But it gets harder and harder each year.
Yep, I hear that. And the thought of metamaterials in Missouri fascinates me, man. Any chance, if I get any chance to come to Missouri, it's a good one, because not only do you guys have White Castle, but my best friend lives there. My favorite podcast host is from there. The list goes on and on. I think it's beautiful. I think there's nobody better to talk to about the mysteries of Missouri. You've dedicated much of your life to this amazing part of the United States. And I believe that if I had to pick one place to focus my attention from a river goddess perspective or worshiping waterways, and that amazing phenomena that follows the arteries of Missouri. And I can't thank you enough for your time, Michael, not only tonight, but also the time you've put in general to this area, these subjects, and they interest so many of us. You're a true help to us all, a hero to us all, and a fountain of knowledge to a place that many, like you said, will never investigate the way you have. Your efforts are truly appreciated, my man, and by many, including myself. Thank you.
Thanks for having me here.
Michael Huntington, ladies and gentlemen. What a rock star. Couldn't be happier with the knowledge, research, and attention to detail Michael has put into everything, explaining the mysteries of Missouri. I, for one, can't wait to get him back. He's the only one out there doing what he's doing to the extent that he's doing it, and for the length that he's been doing it. And I hope to have him back on the podcast soon. Support Michael's work. Check him out on social media. Read his impressive works blogging, being a travel writer, and his articles on strange travels, his many podcasts, Vice, Motherboard, and many more. While you're at it, support Hero Paranormal Podcast. Go to HEROparanormal.com, pick up a hat, pick up a t-shirt, or even easier, don't be scared of that donate button. Hit it. It's not a big deal for the price of a designer cup of coffee. Every month, we bring you content that is above and beyond anything that, well, I think you can get out there for the price. And drop by spacewolfresearch.com. We also have a donate button there. More importantly, go to HEROparanormal.podbean.com if you want to access all of our podcasts in the most easily accessible format. You can also jump on there and become a patron. By doing that, you enable me to bring you the very best from the east to the west and nothing less here on the Hero Paranormal Podcast. Until then, keep your eyes to the skies, feet on the ground, but don't forget to take a look around.
Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an mesmerizing. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an mesmerizing. Blast off.